Welcome, everybody. We have 2 minutes before we get started at the top of the hour. If you'd like to type in the chat box where you're from, that will be very useful. Get an idea of where people are coming to us from. So just type it in the chat box. Ileanda, USA. Don't know where that is. What state's that in? Still have a minute to go. Manitoba. I was born in Manitoba, Churchill, Manitoba. Finland. Got a cold people.
Wow.
Virginia, Shenandoah Valley. Quite a few different places all over. It's between Indiana and Illinois, God's country. Never heard of that. Indiana. Spain, Colorado. Wow. Burkina Faso. I think you've been here before. Recognize the name. Okay, I have 3 o'clock. So we are going to get started since it's the top of the hour. Let me make sure that it's recording. It is. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I am the Poultry Extension Project Manager here at the University of Kentucky. As part of my project, or part of my job description, I work with e-extension, which is the electronic version of the National Extension. Sally, do you have a question? Your hand's up. Type it in the chat box if you have a question. Oh, put the hand down. Okay. So let me get back to where I was. So I'm at the University of Kentucky, and part of my job description is to work with the small and backyard flocks community of practice on e-extension, which is the electronic version of the National Cooperative Extension Service here in the United States. We do monthly webinars. We have a website, Facebook page. I will enter some links to that as the thing is going on. I'm the host today, and Dr. Claudia Dunkley from the University of Georgia is going to be do the presentation today on molting your laying hens. I will be monitoring the chat box and the Q&A box. If you have a question, type it in anytime. If it's a clarification of something that Dr. Dunkley is saying, then I will pop up and interrupt her for clarification. Otherwise, the whole questions will get held to the end. Dr. Dunkley's coming from a hotel, so her bandwidth is low, so she is not using her video to try and make things run a little smoother. So I will be on mute, and Dr. Claudia Dunkley, it's all yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
Sorry, I had already muted myself.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was unmuted.
I can hear you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I know some of you are in different time zone as us. You probably should be in bed, but thank you for joining us. So I'm going to talk to you today about molting laying hens. But before we even start talking about molting the hens or inducing a molt in the hens, we first have to know or be able to define what molting is. And molting is a naturally occurring experience in all birds. So it's not just chickens that molt, all birds molt. It's the shedding of feathers and the replacement of those old feathers for new ones. Now, when it comes to molting in birds, it's usually incomplete in hens, and they'll continue to lay eggs, but at low rates. And this can go on for extended periods of time. So, of course, this is not going to be good for the producers, right? Because they're changing their feathers and they're not laying at the rate that they used to be, and they're still eating, right? So, this, of course, is an unprofitability result, right? So it results in you not making any profit from eggs being produced. And also there would be a reduction in the quality of eggs. So you might be getting a couple eggs from the birds, but the shells are thin, or sometimes there isn't even shell, right? So there is an unprofitability and a reduction in the quality and the quantity of eggs that are being produced during molting. Now, for a commercial farmer, these bigger commercial farmers, this typically will indicate the end of the productive life of that flock, right? So the commercial producer, he would have two options, either to sell the hens and replace them with a new flock, or they will induce or force all of the birds to start molting. That's the thing about molting. All the birds are not molting at the same time. So that's where that drop in profitability comes in, because you're not getting the amount of eggs that you typically would get. So let's talk about molting in birds, in all birds. What is it really? Now, all birds are photostimulated, right? That means they need long days in order to reproduce. They need days, long days where you have more than 12 hours of light for them to produce. When the day length shortens, that's when reproduction stops, and they start shedding their feathers. The reproductive tract within the bird starts regressing, giving them a reproductive rest. For the commercial hens, they receive artificial light, and that gives them continuous long days, so they keep laying. Your birds that you have in your backyard, they will stop laying sooner. Why? Again, because as you know, you summer ends and you start going to fall, the days start to shorten. But for the commercial birds, because they are controlled in a controlled environment where the producer can control the light, they can have them laying for a longer period of time. Molting in the wild. It's not just our commercial or hens or layers that we see, or domestic birds that we grow. It's not just them that molt. All birds molt. And here I have an example of a king penguin. Now, if you know anything about penguins, you know that they are the one that incubate the eggs. And during this time that they are incubating the eggs, they're taking care of those eggs, these birds will lose up to 35% of their body weight. We call this self-starvation, because they're not going to leave the nest while they are protecting the egg, right? Not for any long time, just to get something and come back. So they lose a lot of their body fat. Their body is sustained first by the fat, and then it moves on to the muscle or proteins, right? And begin to break down the protein to provide the body of the birds with energy so that they can live. So that's just an example of how birds in the wild molt, right? So during this time, of course, they're losing the body weight, they're shedding their feathers also. how does this work? How does light control the bird's reproductive tract? There are internal changes that initiates egg production. So what happens? The brain is stimulated by light, and that's the hypothalamus. And as you see from my picture there, it can be natural sunlight or it can be artificial light. So it's stimulated to produce the hormone gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. And this hormone, it stimulates the anterior pituitary, right, which is at the base of the bird's brain. And it stimulates it to start producing FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. And those hormones go to the ovary. Those are released to the ovary, and it causes the ovaries of the bird to begin growing and producing those ova. And afterwards, it starts to produce eggs. Those ovaries then go on and produce estrogen, progesterone, and androgen, and they make the oviduct begin to grow, right? And the oviduct is the other part of the reproductive system of the bird. So the bird's reproductive system is composed of the ovaries and the oviduct. All right. Now, for our commercial layers, the hen day egg production in the laying facilities will begin to reduce, right? So that is why it is so important for them to always have their artificial light. But even with the artificial light, the egg production begin to reduce, and the hens will begin shedding their feathers. So even though we use artificial light and we have them laying for a long period of time, over time, they will naturally start molting, even with that extended lighting period. And the problem is the process of molting in birds is not uniform. So they all don't start molting at the same time. So they begin to shed their feathers, but the feed consumption remains the same. So they're still eating the same amount of feed, but they're not producing eggs. And that is how it becomes a problem for a commercial producer, even for you, the small flock producer, right? Because you're not getting anything, but the birds are eating. So it becomes costly. So here for the commercial producers, they make that decision whether to have a second cycle of production from these birds, or they might even get rid of those birds. So we'll talk more about that. The signs that your flock is entering a molt. How do you know that the birds are molting? You will notice that the amount of eggs that you collect each day is beginning to reduce. And I have a lot of small flock producers that will call me or email me and, asking why my birds have stopped laying. And this can be one of the reasons why, because they are entering into a molt. You'll also notice that there is an increase in the size of the eggs. So you start getting these bigger eggs. But that comes with a problem too. You get bigger eggs, and there's a reduction in the eggshell quality. So the shell of the egg is thinner. You're seeing more cracks. And of course, you're gonna see a lot of feathers in the houses, typically like what you're seeing here in this picture I have here. These are young birds though, but I just have that picture to show you what you could expect, or what you would expect to see in a commercial house. You'll see a lot of feathers on the the floor of the house. All right, so let us talk about the relationship between the flock age, the percent shell crack, and specific gravity. Specific gravity is a method that we use to test the eggshell quality. And if you look at the yellow line indicates the cracks in the eggs and its relation to the age of the birds. So the younger the birds are, see, we started at 23 weeks, you notice that that yellow line starts to go up as the bird gets older, right? So the older the bird gets, the poorer the eggshell quality. And we use that specific gravity test to test those eggs. And we see that as the eggs, and that's the red line, as the birds get older, the quality of the shells start to reduce. So the commercial producers will use specific gravity as a way to determine if they are to go into that, induce the birds into a molt instead of letting them molt naturally. So you have to use that now to determine at what age do we want to make that decision to molt those birds. So decision to molt is based on several things. The projected feed cost. So if feed cost is projected to keep getting higher, then you might want to molt those birds, right? Because the feed cost is getting higher, they're not producing, they're just eating and getting fat. Egg prices is another way to judge or to gauge whether or not you want to molt them. So if the egg prices are high, you might want to keep those birds longer so that you can get more egg out of them. But if the egg prices are not high, then you might not want to do that. There's also the differential prices between egg size. Are you getting more for the bigger egg, or is it the same as those small eggs? Then you might want to molt those birds or even change those birds. And that goes on to the number 4, the cost of pullet replacement. So for your flock, does it make sense to get new birds, even if you only say raising 50 birds and you had 50 layers and the cost of the replacement pullet is low? If it's low, you could then invest into getting new birds rather than molting the older birds. Also, the value of the hens at the end of lay. Some small flock producers sell their hens when they get to a certain age because there is a market for these older birds out there. So if the market price is high for these birds, it might be a reason why you can force a molt on these birds. And of course, the flock performance. So if you have 80% of the birds laying, you can still go on with those birds for a while before whenever it drops below that at a certain percentage, and I should have another slide with that will help you to determine whether or not you want to force them into a molt or you want to just get rid of these birds at the end of the next production cycle. Okay, so this is the slide I'm talking about. This is a very old slide that has been used for a very long time, but it still pertains to what is happening now. So the blue line shows you the hen day percentage production at the beginning of that flock. And you see the line goes up rapidly, and then slowly it starts to go down. when the birds are about 68 weeks old from this diagram we have here, a molt was forced, right? So they molted the birds. That's why it drops all the way down to 0. And then after that 3 weeks of molting, it starts to go up again. So you see it goes all the way up to about 85% hen day egg production, not where they were when they were young birds, but it went back up there. But it also started to, the hen day egg production started to slide down again, and slide down again, and the egg quality starts reduce. The egg weight kind of remain almost the same throughout, but typically we're going to find egg weight getting higher as the bird gets lower, right? So this is a 2-cycle production curve. All right, so now let us talk about forcing them to molt. We know that we've spoken about why they molt, the bird's biological clock. We spoke about that. How can we force them to molt? Since it's a natural process, there are 2 methods of forcing a molt in domestic layers. There is a fasting molt and a non-fasting molt. Both methods have the same step with the exception of feeding. What does that mean? For a fast molt, formerly the commercial layers were forced molted by fasting them. And that, when I said fasting, feed withdrawal, no feed at all, right? So the birds were taken off their feed for up to 7 days. All they got was water. And also there was a change in the light, right? So they only had 8 hours of light per day, and they had water. And quickly these birds would molt, start changing their feathers within days, and then start growing back their feathers. Now, induced molting by fasting is no longer practiced. It had a lot of bad things that came with it. It was very effective. That's one thing I can say. It was very effective getting those birds top laying and producing within a very short period of time. But what happened is that the birds would also rapidly lose weight, right? And their feathers. Yes, you want them to lose a little weight, but they would lose weight, and this would make them susceptible to salmonella infestation. As a result, what these producers found was that there was a high mortality rate within that molted flock. So that has been banned. Basically, we don't force molt birds anymore. Sorry, we don't force molt them through fasting anymore. Molting now is done by using different types of molt diets. So we have the rapid loss and regrowth of feathers, and this will last 6 to 8 weeks, right? This is the non-fasting method we're talking about now. We're going to force them to molt, but we're not going to fast. We're not going to fast them. And the purpose, of course, of molting is to give these birds a rest so that they can lose some body weight and enter into a new laying cycle. The best age for you to molt these birds would be between 65 and 73 weeks of age. And it can extend their reproductive life by improving the rate at which they lay. The shell quality will improve, and also the albumin height, right? That's white inside of those eggs. And birds can be molted for up to 3 times in their reproductive life, right? So if you follow the steps, it can be done for your small flock as well. And we're going to talk about the steps now. The steps to induce or force a mold. Now, if you have open-sided houses, you'd want to add curtains, right? Because remember, one of the first thing, we're going to change the amount of light. As you remember from the beginning of the presentation, light is what stimulates these birds to lay eggs. They need more than 8 hours of light a day. So we are going to cut that light. That's one of the first things you're going to do. So that's why if you don't have houses that is controlled by light, that you can control the light fully, if you have the sides open, and you can see from my example here, the top picture, we have, we show where this house, this grower covered the sides of the house so that no light could get in, no natural light can get in. So you want to block out all the light. Here down at the bottom, you could do that also with the hoop, the hoop houses. Of course, this bottom one needs to be a little bit more, you need a heavier material over it to block the light out, right? So you want to control that. Second, you darken the house. That means, again, no more than 8 hours, right, of light, 16 hours of dark. That's how you're going to do it. The third step is to give them their molting diet, right? And you're giving them their molting diet from day one. So you give them their molting diet, and there are various different molting programs or diets that's available based on limiting crucial nutrient intake, right? So what you want to give them a diet that is low in energy, but high in fiber. And I have some examples here of mold diets that have been used. So we have wheat middlings that has shown to be good for inducing a mold. Soy hull, alfalfa pellets, and also cottonseed meal, right? There are other things, jojoba meal, guar meal, grape pomace. The idea is, as I said, to use something that has high fiber but low energy. The birds will begin shedding their feathers within a couple of days, right? Quickly, you'll start to see a lot of feathers on the ground, and all the birds will stop laying within 7 days, right? So between 5 to 7 days, no eggs. No eggs will be seen. Next, you want to bring them out of that mold, right? And this you will do at around 21 days. So you're forcing them to mold for 3 weeks. They'll be on that diet for 3 weeks, right? Remember, 8 hours of light, 8 hours of light and 16 dark. So you increase the light to 21. Around day 21, 14 to 7 hours of light, 17 hours of light. Then you're gonna give them their full feed ration, whether it's layer, you're gonna give them their layer ration at around day 28. And around that same time, the birds will begin laying again. And birds should have full access. This is very important. Full access to water at all times, right? So during the dark periods, full access of water. During that period where they only have that 8 hours of light per day, they should have their full access of water. All right. And that is it. So it's not a difficult thing to do, as you can see, right? Just a few steps and you can molt your birds.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. There's her email there if you need it. Anybody have any questions? You can do it in the chat box or the Q&A box. You can stop sharing, Claudia. No questions? I guess I have one. How do you stop a hen that wants to sit on eggs, wants to go broody, but you don't have any eggs, so you don't want her to sit on eggs?
Okay. Yeah, sometimes you're, of course, you're laying, you have them laying because you want to collect eggs, right? And you have some birds that have this habit to be broody. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you're hatching eggs. But if you're not hatching eggs, and these are all eggs that are to be eaten, you don't want the birds to be doing this. One thing that we have encouraged producers to do is to like set up a broody pen that has no nest boxes or anything like that in there. Some people put stones on the ground to deter them from trying to make nesting areas. So that's one way in which you can reduce the broodiness of birds.
Okay, we got a question. How might the calcium requirement change during the forced molt period?
Well, they won't require as much calcium, right? During that forced molting because you're not producing eggs, right?
But aren't they redoing their medullary bone?
Yes, that's why the diet that they have, right? Those different examples of the diet, that will give them the amount of calcium that they need.
Okay. Can you use the same system of forced molting for birds that are kept on the free range?
On the free range? No, because, well, if you can control their light, right? Because we do have birds that are allowed to just roam around the place. But if you have somewhere to close them in, you'd have to do that. If you wanted to put them through a mold, you'd have to close them in for that 3-week period. Right? So it can be done if you can control the light.
Right.
Because that is the key to prevent them from producing those hormones that will stimulate the ovary and the oviduct. So during the time when the birds are molting, their reproductive tract, it shrinks to a pullet that's about 13 weeks old, if that old, right? So the reproductive tract shrinks to less than a teenager then, right? So, and that's because it's the light, the sun, not just sunlight. If you have birds on the range, they are exposed to sunlight. So that would stimulate their reproductive tract, and you can't just molt them and they're running around. You have to have them in a controlled area.
Yeah, it depends on how many hours of light there is in the day
true.
where you're located.
Exactly, because there are some places in the world that has that 8 hours of light, right? So that would be the birds would naturally molt during that time.
What % of body weight do you want birds to return to after molting?
Well, the body weight thing was an issue when you were force molting birds without feed, right? Now, yes, they'll still lose some body weight on the molting diet, but it's not something that you watch as much as we used to do when we were force molting it. We didn't want them to lose more than that 35%. Right? But that's not an issue now because we don't force molt them by starvation anymore.
Right. After a forced molt of 28 days, would that be a time to cull birds whose pubic bones don't open up?
Pubic bones don't open up.
like we
Oh,
do
I
with the
mean,
past production hens with the
yeah,
fingers.
yeah.
pupa.
I mean that would be an easy time for you to identify those birds,
Depends
right?
on how many birds you have to try and handle them all individually.
That's true. That's true too. But you know, as the 4-Hers already know, you look out for different things that you can use to identify whether or not a bird is productive, right? And again, it depends on the breed of bird. So you can be looking at their shanks, you can be looking at their earlobe to see any yellowing. But if it's a white bird now, you know, if it's a other colored bird, there might be different, you know, things that you can look for to see if these birds are producing.
As I see molting compromise egg production, is it profitable to stimulate it early or only when we note molting signs?
I mean, you don't want to force them to molt in the middle of production, right?
Right.
You have to watch and know the age of your birds and know that small flock producers tend to have a mixture of ages, right? But if you're doing something like growing birds to produce eggs to sell, you should know your older birds from your younger birds, and you'll be you don't want to molt a young bird, right? That's in the prime of production. So you have to know what your birds are producing. You have to know the different flocks that you have within your birds. And frankly, you should be separating them.
Right. Especially if you want to molt the older ones.
Right, if you move the older birds.
Doesn't the hen replace the calcium in her body during a molt?
It will be replaced from the feed. Certainly.
So it doesn't have extra calcium in the molt feed?
Yes, there would be calcium. All of those feed that I suggested
Okay.
are pretty high enough in calcium.
Okay. Any more questions? I did put in the links to our webpage and whatnot. Say we do the webinars every month. They are recorded and posted online in the YouTube channel. I also put a link to that. Next month is October 1st, and it's deciding on coop plans for backyard hens. So if you're into that, trying to build a house or whatever, I hope you will join us then. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Claudia. Very good job.
You're welcome.
And have a safe visit in Atlanta. Thank you,
All right,
everybody.
take care.
All right.